Hello, and welcome to our newest series, HR Heroes, where we will be interviewing inspirational executives who are champions and heroes across the HR space. Whether leading a global transformation program, scaling world-class startups to IPO, or engaging with executive boards, we'll be looking to tell the story of the journey and the lessons learned along the way. Today's episode, we are going to meet with Tejal Shah, who I've known for quite some time now. We have been connected for a while and often have very interesting conversations around women in the workplace, around AI, around transformation, change management. And today we are going to discuss all things AI transformation in the workplace, which is a very hot topic at the moment. So I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. So do you want to start out, maybe give us a quick introduction for the listeners, a little bit about yourself, and yeah, we'll dive into it.
Okay, wonderful. Hi everyone, I'm Tejal. I have a very squiggly career. I'm actually a chartered accountant by training. I spent many years in investor relations, which I think was the real pivotal part of my career, because I really understood at that point like how the commercials of a business work, and actually it was a front seat to really how leaders think. And then from there, I did lots of transformation type roles, and then joined Kantar, which is a private equity backed marketing company, into the HR team and got more and more involved in the talent space. And what I'm passionate about is driving change at scale, but doing it in a human-centered way. And so I've been really involved in AI adoption across Kantar, and people generally, and how do we help them thrive? Because actually, this is a human transformation, and how do we really empower people with the tools to be great at what they do and better at their jobs than they already are?
Thank you for that. Yeah, look, I think it's such a broad topic, right? And the reality is we could talk for days about this and probably cover it all, but we'll try and get as much as we can in today. So what's your experience of AI transformation so far in some of the businesses you've worked in?
Really, my experience is from Kantar. So a couple of years ago, we started using AI just within my own talent team, and really across the learning and development space. So using AI to develop content, thinking about AI coaching for our leaders and managers, and then got more involved in driving AI adoption at pace, at scale across Kantar. And Kantar is Microsoft's top 3 AI adoption clients now. And that's really happened through kind of horizontal adoption. So improving the AI literacy across the whole organization. And, you know, the key to this is really great change management. So, you know, campaigns, being clear on the training that's available, the sponsorship at a leadership level, champions, hackathons, peer-to-peer engagement, you know, all of that great change management stuff has been really important. You know, then actually thinking through, well, how does this translate to productivity? And it's really hard because, you know, I use AI all the time, and I think it makes me productive, you know, because I use AI as a thought partner. But at an enterprise-wide level, we weren't necessarily seeing that translate into productivity. And so actually there's a lot of work done around that vertical adoption piece, which is really thinking about the pain points in your organization and workflows being reimagined, so that when you are then applying AI, you are either automating processes or you are augmenting work for your employees. And that's where the productivity improvements are. One of the really early examples we had was at Kantar. We undertake market research. We broke that process down. One of the parts of the process was receiving back verbatim feedback from participants in the survey. And we would spend, typically, someone in a global delivery center would spend a week analyzing the data, pulling out the trends, working out the insights, putting it into a PowerPoint presentation, pulling out the recommendations. AI is doing that in a matter of minutes now. And the testing is incredible that the actual quality of the product is better as a result. So that's a real example of how it really does speed up productivity, freeing up people to do more value-adding work.
Absolutely. And I suppose that can be seen in different ways across different businesses. That's
absolutely
just in that experience there at Kantar. What are the most significant ways you've seen AI used to kind of create that value in working life too?
Yeah, and I think it comes back down to this sort of vertical adoption. So finding those pain points, be it something that's just laborious to do, that takes up lots of people time, that costs a lot to do. So things like customer services has got brilliant examples of AI being used to really break down the process. So AI being used to route the algorithm to route different queries and triage what is needed, what gets prioritized for a human advisor versus an AI. Chatbots that are trained up on, policies, processes that are really responding real time in an intuitive way through LLMs to resolve queries. Training is a brilliant one where, again, if you stick with customer services, there are initiatives around real-time listening, real-time training, kind of prompts coming up for sales teams to help them be better at the cross-sell opportunities or the tone that the client or the customer is expressing and how they can better adapt to that. And then in financial services, there's some brilliant examples of really automating certain processes. So if you apply for a credit limit increase, there's lots of paperwork and things that get reviewed by humans to make sure that they're making the right decision. Actually, AI is automating all of that because you can set the parameters and the type of documents and criteria that need to be met. That means that, 70-80% of those applications are effectively automated through AI, and then a human is overseeing that and looking at the harder cases. There's really interesting examples as well in financial crime avoidance as well, and avoiding fraud and using some of the sentiment analysis and things like that to really reduce the error rate of fraud and improve that customer experience, particularly for vulnerable customers and things like that.
Absolutely. I think, you touched on quite a lot of examples there, which are helping, I guess, both businesses and employees, and I suppose employers, gain efficiencies, right? Taking a lot of the time and manpower, and I suppose, therefore, potentially saving costs. But beyond those efficiency gains, what are maybe some of the less obvious benefits companies are experiencing when integrating AI into their teams? Any examples that you've seen?
Yeah, I think, there's lots actually. So I think the first is really thinking around that cognitive diversity. So AI can act as your thinking partner and help you challenge your assumptions, think about your blind spots, and helps you be better at your job, particularly when you are looking at making decisions or evaluating options. When you look at the data for people who are using AI, the improvement in performance for top talent isn't that much. The real delta comes for medium or low performance in your business, lifting the floor on their performance. I think there's a huge opportunity there, because if you couple that with people who are who don't have English as their first language, for example, or they've got a neurodiversity issue where they might not process data so well, or they're not that confident in writing and articulating their ideas, actually it builds capability in those kinds of opportunities, and it brings in a different way of thinking that might ordinarily not have been there. So I think there's a real opportunity to enhance that cognitive diversity to help people be better, be more. I think the second one, what I would say is it brings confidence to leaders, and AI can act as a mirror. It can test the logic, it can surface inconsistencies. They can practice difficult conversations or refine their narratives before stepping into a high stakes conversation. And what we found at Kantar was we introduced AI coaching for various levels, and it took a while for people to actually start using it. But when they did, the feedback was incredible, because actually they were leaders were feeling more confident about going into that exec team meeting or that board presentation or with investors. So it creates a safe space to practice. And then the third area would be around embedding the culture at organizations. So one of the ways we used AI was to design our Growing Exceptional Manager program content. And the magic wasn't, in creating new content, because actually there's tons of content around for managers. The magic was that actually the content was embedded in Kantar's culture, Kantar's context and its culture. We'd got a new purpose, new strategic drivers. We'd put a new skills framework in place. We had new values. Actually, the scenarios that the AI was used to create was super aligned to Kantar's context. And it meant that managers learned in cohorts, they were debating scenarios, but actually what you're doing is embedding your culture, which is your operating system. How do you make decisions? How do you collaborate? How do you make trade-offs? And that was like turbocharged by using AI. So I think it can really help embed your culture too.
Yeah, it's a super interesting way of thinking of it, because oftentimes I think people see AI as just like a tool and a technology plugin, right? As opposed to, as you describe it, more of a co-pilot, and having that kind of, buddy, I guess, that can challenge you, that can build your confidence, make you think in different ways. So yeah, I really like those points, especially the one around cognitive diversity and raising the bottom layer performers, because as you're right, oftentimes we zoom in on the top performers, like how can we keep them good?
But actually the real delta, if you want to improve performance by 1% or 5% in your company, if you focus on the bottom rungs of your performance, that's where you're going to get the biggest delta. Yeah,
exactly. Which again then contributes to a more positive culture, right?
Exactly.
So lots of things to think about there. What are some of your learnings on AI adoption? Have you had challenges there? I know you mentioned at first, there can be a bit of a change management challenge, but what else?
The change management piece is really important. And I think the first part of this is being really clear around your narrative and your tone to explain the why of why you're bringing in AI. And there's a balance to be had. And, I think organizations and leaders need to think about where they are on that spectrum of, on one end, everyone needs to be realistic and introduce that concept of mild peril, where actually we do need to change and evolve as organizations to stay competitive. But doing that in the context of lots of fear and anxiety is really, really difficult, particularly with lots of companies already cutting jobs and things like that. And this context of AI is going to replace jobs. But the reality is grounding it in what's in it for me as an employee is really important. So, how will AI help get rid of some of the most laborious parts of your job, or the admin parts of your job? How does it help you do the work that you think is more value adding, that you're spending with clients? And also, how do you help people take ownership of their careers? AI is not going away. So how do organizations empower their people to build digital skills that are going to be needed wherever, they go in that organization or somewhere else? And put a little bit of onus on and ownership on individuals to say, look, here are some tools to help you be better at your job so that you can move up the value curve as well. And I think, a context of being private equity backed, which is what Kantar was, is also really, really hard in the mix, because actually there's a bigger cost focus there as well. So I think organizations calibrating where they are on that spectrum and the tone is really, really important. And then the other piece related to change is actually leaders need to own the change. They need to drive that change leadership. It shouldn't be for HR to drive. It shouldn't be for the technology team to push down on the organization. So there is something about leaders rolling up their sleeves, using the AI themselves, bringing their own literacy up, but actually owning the change, because actually their leadership, their inspiration, them voicing their fears, them addressing some of these concerns is actually going to be really, really important. And then I think there are two other areas. One is more broadly, cross-functional teams are really important. And by that, I mean, you need this really tight construct between your strategy team, who will help you find the value creation opportunities in your organization where AI can really turbocharge that value creation. You need the tech team who are going to help you find the right tools and make sure they've got the right security construct around them, etc. Then you need the people team to help with the change management. But most of all, it needs to be owned by the business and driven by it. So those cross-functional teams are really important. And then I think the last lesson is really around your data. Unless you're a relatively new business, your data is going to be messy. There'll be patchwork of data in different systems, in different places. There'll be sticky plasters over places, because actually it's not very exciting to invest in that kind of data infrastructure in the past. And to really leverage AI to its potential, you do need to get your house in order in terms of your data, where it is, what's most up to date, have you created a data lake? You need investment, you need human capital resource to help work that through. AI can help in itself, but that is an investment. And I think that's the learning where if you really want to create value using AI, you need to be thoughtful around spending the time enabling that through cleaning up your data.
Yeah, I think those are really good points, and it's relevant to any business unit, right? Because it could be customer data, it could be financial data, it could be HR, people information, and ultimately, as you say, there could be years and years of legacy information on systems, which there's always going to be those situations. But if they're serious about it, investing the time and maybe resource and money into setting themselves up to have that success is probably super important in the beginning. And I like your point around the ownership, because it's pretty easy to perhaps say, well, this is a technology tool, maybe the team looks after it, or it's policy, so perhaps HR is going to figure out how to enable us. But actually going back to the accountability of the whole business and the leaders to roll it out. So interesting. On that point around, I suppose, leadership and management, what would you say is the role of the middle layer of management adopting AI in this day-to-day, and I suppose team operations, things like that?
So I think managers have a really, really tough time at the moment. They're sort of sitting at that tension point between that strategic ambition at the top of the house and that operational reality. So I think managers play a huge role in operationalizing AI into the teams that they have, particularly around translating that sort of lofty ambition, as it might be perceived, into something that's translated to specific goals and areas for their teams. I think, there is so much importance around creating that psychological safety in teams. And you often hear people say, and the research shows that actually there are microcosms of culture related to kind of how that manager operates. And so the tone they set around the psychological safety, around giving their teams permission to experiment, to explore, to try things, to learn fast is really, really important. But then also equally important is that coaching capability within that manager to bring that culture of exploring, what went well when you tried that out, what didn't go so well, what did their team learn, and what would they do differently. And I think this applies particularly to women who are using AI, because actually there's a recent Harvard study that shows that women are using AI 25% less than men. And, this is to do with the feeling of AI is cheating, or they want to get it right first time, or they don't have the skills to use it. And actually, the manager's role in those kind of cases is really, really important to help empower their teams, and particularly some of these pockets where, for women who aren't using it as much as men, and bringing in that coaching, but also that accountability. So getting it into team members' objectives, getting that focus around how they're using AI to solve problems rather than just this blanket approach, is really, really important.
Absolutely. I think, that's a really interesting point around the women in the study not using it, and when is that stigma going to kind of go away? And at what stage do we see it as an enabler? I guess it will take a bit of time because it's all happening so quick, and it's also new, but it's interesting to see how it will all change into the future.
Well, ultimately, it's a human transformation rather than just AI. So this is why I think managers are stuck in the middle. They're crushed under the pressure of driving commercial targets, cutting costs, improving productivity. But actually, their role, as the Gallup data shows, 70% of a team's engagement is driven by their manager. I think it is absolutely core for those managers to enable and empower those kind of populations that aren't as comfortable using AI.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think so. Looking forward, maybe 5 to 10 years into the future, how do you predict, or what do you predict to be the next kind of major advancement or disruption in the workplace driven by AI?
Yeah, so I think there is so much potential for AI, and we're only just getting started. Despite all the hype and the frenzy, we are only just at chapter one of a big long novel. So I think the first is offshore teams and hubs have become really popular over the last 10, 20 years or so. But actually, the cost arbitrage that was really appealing for setting up offshore hubs is getting smaller and smaller. The war on talent in those hubs is really high. So there's quite high attrition in those kind of hub locations, like in Chennai, in Hyderabad, in Warsaw, in Porto, in Malaysia, Philippines. And people are quite fickle and moving to new roles for not very much more money either. And because these offshore hubs are normally in-person type cultures, actually the investment into that culture on a day-to-day basis is quite high. And it is really, really important to drive that culture there. So I think, the next major advancement is really looking at how does agentic AI replace some of those roles or augment some of those roles. And if you are a business that hasn't already got an offshore hub, I would be thinking, how do we reimagine our processes and think about the outcomes that we want today, and think about how AI and agentic AI can help there. And I think you'll find that there's sort of a longer term investment upfront to work that through. But agentic AI is much more scalable when you deploy it thereafter. So particularly for, operational type work, finance ops, help desk, HR services, reporting type blocks of work, those kind of workflows are exactly those types of things that I think could be looked at with agentic AI. I think the second trend I would say is almost what I call like live culture mapping. Engagement surveys, performance reviews, static dashboards, these once a year type activities are just going to be replaced by almost continuous sensing. To give this sort of almost live culture map, I think the AI will be able to give you sentiment analysis from the tone, the energy, the psychological safety across different communication channels, how people are giving feedback to each other. You could probably surface themes around trust gaps or micromanagement, things like that. And, of course, you have to manage the privacy side of things, because actually, does that look like intrusion, like, supervisory intrusion or not? But if you're looking at the data in aggregate across large populations, I think that could be really interesting to give you a live kind of pulse as to how your organization is doing. And then the last area is really around thinking about skills differently. I think AI will get rid of CVs. They will be obsolete because it's really around the job and the tasks, not really driven by static job descriptions. So I think roles will end up being fragmented into skill clusters, and you'll have internal marketplaces matching people to problems rather than CVs to job descriptions. So you'll see careers become even more fluid, which is music to my ears, given I've got such a squiggly career. But then it also brings about a new skill set in managers and leaders, because they're managing quite a dynamic workforce and dynamic teams, and probably be managing a mix of humans and agents, right? So what does that mean on how you train up your managers, how you train up your leaders? How do you bring that accountability where the human is always accountable? And how do these teams work together so that, the allocation of the work is kind of most best worked out to optimize the situation? I think it could be really fascinating.
Absolutely. And even just like thinking about those ideas, kind of, you can go in many different ways and angles, I think. It probably will take time, but as you say, it's a human transformation as well as technology and the AI. But there's lots of potential, lots of opportunity. It's kind of makes the world feel like it's getting smaller, but then, as you say, with the offshoring piece as well, there's that kind of added challenge, and lots to
really interesting and dynamic landscape, I think.
Absolutely. And it's only the beginning, like you said. What about the impact of AI on the workforce size, the shape, and perhaps the composition?
Yeah, I mean, this is the biggest and most trickiest question for people to get their arms around. I think on one hand, there are some directional insights emerging. So when you look at the World Economic Forum data, they're saying 92 million of jobs could be displaced by AI, but actually 170 million new jobs will be created. And so, if you think about those new roles in prompt engineering or AI workflow design or cyber specialist or AI governance and ethics type roles, there's lots of new roles that will come. But actually, the data is showing, and Indeed did a survey that shows 2/3 of entry roles will now have over 50% of the tasks that can be replaced by generative AI. And you can see that in the data, like the number of entry level roles are declining in big organizations. And you can see that in all the consulting firms, for example, professional services firms, many corporates. And I think it's really tricky because the sort of the skill expectation is rising, and you can see that the brightest graduates will be sucked up really, really quick because they can add value immediately to their organization. But then there'll be a whole bunch of others who might not have a graduate role. And And actually that traditional career path where actually junior employees learn by doing, they learn by making mistakes, they learn gradually, they need the feedback, they need that culture around the office to really understand what it is to work in a corporate. How do they develop their critical thinking skills, their people management skills, their collaboration skills, right? And I think it's really tricky. And so I think the key on this is understanding within your organization what is your appetite when it comes to short term versus long term. You know, I think in the short term there will be lots of roles that are exited, but actually that will be at the detriment to your longer term talent pipeline. It will be to the detriment of bringing in like super curious minds that will probably be AI native, that I think will probably displace some of those sleepy managers who have been used to doing things the same way for the last, 15, 20, 30 years, right? And I think organizations need to work out where they are on that spectrum. But I think the key in all this is really reimagining work. And so less about CVs and more about skills, and actually breaking down jobs to work through which parts of those jobs are automated completely by AI. What part do you use AI and it augments the work that you already do, and which parts are distinctly human skills. And I think there are lots of brilliant, talent engines and software out there that are trying to help answer this question. And my kind of big question mark on this is those kind of platforms ingest job descriptions to help you understand the kind of skills profiles that you've got in your organization and where you want to be, and then help you model that out. But actually the work needs to be redesigned. So those job descriptions are out of date already. So I think, it's a really, really tricky question. And I think the more short-termist organizations are deciding what kind of outcomes they want, and if their focus is cost, then they will take out the roles, and actually the work will get re-engineered real time rather than in an organized way. So I think it's a really tricky area, and I think thinking about short term versus long term is really important. But one thing for sure is that your kind of typical triangle shaped organization might move to become more diamond shaped as AI does more of the admin type roles. It's a moving feast, so it'll be interesting to see how this piece evolves.
Absolutely. And I think, the reality is the lower level, junior level roles will become less volume, but at some point you do need to replace your right? And they can't get there overnight. So absolutely investing into those kind of the future workforce, though it might look smaller and more versatile but different, reality is they need to come into the workforce at some point.
And I think it puts the onus on organizations to think differently, because actually you want from your junior people to accelerate how they develop their critical thinking skills, their collaboration skills, their agility, their creativity. So how do you help your workforce build those skills fast when they haven't had 5 years in a workplace to slowly learn them, right?
Absolutely. And it's only the beginning, like you said. What kind of advice would you give to leaders who are maybe just at the beginning of exploring the integration of AI into their departments? I know you've obviously worked in some bigger corporates, but also doing advisory work in smaller firms as well. So seeing probably, different perspectives. What kind of tips and advice would you give to, anyone embarking on that integration of AI now?
Yeah, so I think leaders need to just start with curiosity and really understand, where are your people stuck? What is the work that sucks the life and energy out of people? and think about what you're solving for. Is it cost? Is it capability? Is it improving employee experience? Is it a consistent experience, or is it something else? And what are those success metrics that you want to move? So to bring that to life from a HR perspective, we wanted to improve the people operations processes to improve employee experience and to reduce cost. We looked at an AI bot that would sit over our employee policies using retrieval augmented generation. And so the RAG system basically is putting an LLM over a closed pool of knowledge. And then combined with the user prompt, it generates a very intuitive answer. It doesn't sound very complicated, actually, but the challenge is you need to do a lot of work to get the data right. So retiring old policies, making sure they're written in a consistent way. And actually AI can help with all of that. But the key part of this, and the advice I'd give to leaders, is to really build relationships with your legal and compliance teams. There is a risk aversion with AI that you can't avoid. And the more you help your legal and compliance teams understand what you're trying to do and why and the outcomes you want to drive, and reciprocate by understanding what are the privacy rules, what are the things that the legal and compliance teams are worried about, particularly in HR, where you need to understand the rules such that if you are using AI to make a talent decision, that should be flashing red in your mind as to that is a high risk area. If, however, what you're doing is improving the insights and you collect a bunch of insights to then make a talent decision, that reduces the risk. So I think there's mutual collaboration to understand where each other are coming from. And it's, in my experience, worth investing the time to build that relationship with a solid foundation. And then understanding the kind of broader ethical and governance pieces around how do you ensure that there is a human in the loop? How do you make who's accountable? How do you make those decisions? What is the audit trail? How can you look at all of these things to really understand that? And then the last piece, I think, is, as I started with, really understanding why you're doing this and building the narrative from a change perspective and treating this as a human transformation rather than just a tech automation or a installation of a new set of tools. I think this needs real human skills to really evaluate and collaborate and be creative and actually engage people and co-create as you go along.
Absolutely. Wow. Oh, well said. I think you probably nailed it there. Understanding that why, right? You can't go forward ultimately without having the understanding of the challenge, rather than just getting AI because everyone else is getting on the train.
Exactly.
But really, what problems is it going to solve and how, and building that into your business, and then taking the human empathy and transformation side. Amazing. Thank you so much for that. That's some seriously good insight and really, really interesting points that you've raised today. So I'm sure everyone will be excited to listen. There's one last question that I have for you, and that is, where is next on your vacation bucket list?
Australia is my big one that I would love to go to. I've spent time in New Zealand, but I want like a good month or so to explore Australia. We have a little girl who's turning 8 very soon, so she's getting old enough to do a big long haul trip like that. So I think that would definitely be on my bucket list for the future.
Amazing. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining, and we will catch up again soon.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.